Hello and welcome, dear Titrix users. With this tutorial I want to explain the use of default values in construction using the example of ground sills and wall posts. I worked on this building. A roof layout has already been created, a simple gabled roof, and I now want to define certain values before I enter the sole plates. I am going over the default settings here. I can also find them under this icon here. In all model areas, the same space everywhere. If I go down here on the left, always up front, default values. Determine the insert. Default values. Keep this mask and use this button here above, Variables Definition, to enter the editor where I can input the variables. I'd like to predefine some values for the bottom plate now. I call the first variable v1. Here I want to set identification number for the purlins. For this I will use structural timber and select the identification number for the component as the unit. The second variable, v2, here I determine the width of the base plate. Let's assume it's 6 inches. Next, I want to define the height of the base plate. For this too, I choose 16 centimeters. And then I would also like to define two values for the head processing of the foot timings, specifically the length of the forehead area. Until next time, I choose 75%, and for that I take the number. We will see later in the dialog box that here one number is the right one, because the percentages are set in the dialog box. And finally, the variable number 5. Here I set the angle of the second section. I want these angles to be 45 degrees and will select this unit accordingly. Okay, we see. This is what the finally defined variables look like. This dialog box for the default settings, if I leave this tick here, appears every time when I then open the structure. I confirm that when I switch to the roof structure and want to input bottom plates, then I have a setting here that I've always used. Everything is defined here. Footrests 12 by 12. And down here, the head processing is determined. And here I want to use my newly defined variables now. This means I'm going to the formula editor in the serial number at the back here, and now I have the v1 identification number for the rivets in the user variables that I defined. I will take it over.
We already know this from
here. The background color in the field changes to cyan, and in the back the calculator icon representing the equation editor changes to green. I want to do the same now for the width of my base plate. I am going to use my user variable width sill plate. Okay, again. For the height, of course, as well.
Adopt the height of the base plate.
So, I've defined the length of the star surface and the angle for head processing. This means I go down here into my setting. You can also use the formula editor here. Select my variable length of the forehead surface. I defined that as a number with its unit, and the percentage comes from the dialog in this dialog box. And the second section with the 45 degrees, I also used the one I defined for this, the default value in the second section. I can either double click here or use the arrow to bring up the variable. I would like to make this setting now, since it variables. By using the default values, yes, viable has become. Also make that recognizable in the name. This means rectangular remains fixed as before. I do not need the 75 degrees, 75%, and the 45 degrees do not apply either. So I call it rectangular section 2, and then after. Evaluate according to specification. Okay. And I do the same here for this setting for the board input. I also used my default values here. This is no longer the base plate 12 by 12, but we see the numerical values come from those I determined. Default values, meaning I change it here as well on footboards. Evaluate according to specifications. I can use it here now and of course receive it. The component, the correct ones from my previously defined values, but we see here as with the, once the components are inserted, the values are fixed. That means the component is not connected to the default values afterwards and would not change anymore if the preset values were altered.
Okay.
I want to do the same for my wall posts. For this, I'm going back to my default values and add to my list. Go back into the editing definition and expand my values here. I would also like the identification number for the... Here too I initially use KVH and take the unit identification number for component again. Next, I want to determine the height of the posts, distant FSI, and I can immediately incorporate here that the height of my posts is equivalent to the thickness of my layer 0. I'll write this down right here. Take here 20 centimeters. Then I want to determine the width of the posts as well. Here I take 8 centimeters, and finally I also want to determine a value for a prior processing, namely the depth for the fascia.
Have a nice evening.
Not 1 centimeter confirms that, and I see the list of my default values has expanded accordingly. Another tip, of course, I can here not just typing in a new ID number, but through this browser button I can access the component catalog and choose something else. I'll just leave it at KVH for now, confirm that, and move on to the layout. So I want to input walls, and I already want to use my variables in the wall structure, namely the thickness of layer 0. We also see the formula editor here. That means I can go by what I've just defined. Here, fetch and get the 20 centimeters in my setup. I also want to go with this structure now, since it has become variable, and save a new name that is
Throw it back to default again. Okay.
Then I'll go around here with my walls. And we already know this. In the edge finish I now have my 20 centimeters, but no longer connected with a square value. So, in the wall construction, if I now want to enter the sills, for example, I have the current setting with a threshold of 6 by 16, but the height of my threshold as well as the wall posts. I would like to use it now from my preset value. Is the equivalent thickness of layer 0. I could of course use the variable thickness of layer 0 here, which would lead to the same result. But to keep it uniform, I'm now taking the same value. For time reasons, I save myself from saving these settings. The same with the RAM. Here as well,
I will replace the fixed height.
through the settings I've defined when I insert the posts, here too I have an old setting where everything is fixed. I'll do it. Just like we saw earlier with the footplates. Defined default values. I have defined the width of the posts, and the height I just used for gables and frames. And down here in the frontal lobes, the depth of penetration should use the standard value from now on. You see, it's still stuck. Now I'm splitting this off. The front panel is not 1 centimeter deep, but the front panel next. So, assessing the cables.
Okay.
Oh, I would like to use that here. And now let's save this post as well. Here's what I had in mind. The identification number, the dimension, and the depth of the faceplate. If I now move
Before pre-catch.
I am now evaluating the default values. The default value is set. Save. Stand out from each other a bit. For this, I'm adding a lineup here. Let's take V100 and call this part the sole plate. Haha, did I pin us? Suggestion value. I'll just write something down and take separator as the unit, and we'll see what happens. Even above the subway construction parts, add another line. Into the sphere. A wall post. Same as before. I'm putting in atmosphere here and using a separator. And now I am saving the set of default values of foot purlins and wall posts. See you in a moment. The separator has displayed the text we entered here as a heading in a different color, and the values are nicely visually separated from each other. So, to show something in more detail, I'll go back to project management to discuss the major benefits of working with preset values. And here I'm selecting a new building, create no template. Building law 2. First of all, before I do anything else, I want to repeat my preset values, and right here at the top, wherever you can save something, you can also recall. And I'm retrieving my racing pigeon set from just now. Okay. I will choose a different identification number here for the stair treads and make it a bit smaller. I'll set the frontal area here to 60% of the chain height, and I'll make the angle 30 degrees. Also, for the wall posts I'm making some changes here. I want my position 0 now at 16 centimeters and the tenon width to 6 and the mortise width I would like 15 millimeters. When I want to input walls, and I'm taking the same execution that I used earlier, now I have my 16 centimeters standing here. Without doing something actively,
Grease, yes.
Open once, and of course in the wall construction too. When I enter my threshold here, I already have the correct 16. Likewise with the ram. And for the posts, I have 6 by 16, have my C24, and here below I have the 15 millimeters depth. This means, you can see right away, I used the same settings, and with the different definition of default values, everything fits immediately, and do not have to change my values at different places first. The same applies, of course, and the edge takeover for the roof. Just quickly a saddle roof.
Take a version here.
A 35 degrees
A meter. Okay. Here are two gables. And in the attic, wow.
When entering the pedicure, it's the same again. The same setting as just now, and I have my changed values also down here for the head treatments. I hope I was able to show you with this simple example how working with default values can be very flexible and efficient. I just saved my settings once, and through the new definitions of default values in a new structure can simply continue working with the same settings. For comparison, various settings for horse input from version 11. It's immediately evident here. Every setting includes fixed numerical values for the size of the components and other parameters, and with the new default value technology, all these settings aren't needed anymore. You can control all numeric values from the input dialog box through default values, and can reduce all these settings to a very minimal extent. Thank you for watching, and as always, see you next time.